Our Insightful next session will be a virtual live panel session moderated by Paul Hadjy from Horangi, Singapore. They'll be discussing the importance of cloud security and compliance in the new normal. Mr. Paul Hadjy, please.
Thank you everyone for joining us here at the Singapore FinTech Festival in 2020. It's been a very eventful year for companies and people alike. And as more and more businesses of all kinds kind of make the transition from the cloud into SaaS, we put together this panel with the top cloud and security experts in the technology space. And we'll be talking to you a bit about the best practices in cloud security, compliance, and actionable insights on what the industry players are doing and how they're doing it at scale. So I'll make a quick introduction to the panelists and let them introduce themselves. So first we have George Doe, Gojek Senior Vice President and CISO. George.
Yes, thank you, Paul. So thank you, everybody. My name is George Doe. I'm the Chief Information Security for Gojek. For those of you who don't know, Gojek is a super app here in Asia Pac. We're known for ride hailing, food, and transport. I'm very happy to be here this morning, this afternoon, and this evening with my esteemed colleagues, Alejandra, Ned, Ishan, and Steve. Really happy to be on this panel.
Thanks, George. And we also have Alejandra Arcigues, Security and Compliance Specialist at AWS.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Yes, my name is Alejandra Arcigues. I'm a Security Solutions Architect at Amazon Web Services. And in this role, I support customers to understand their regulatory requirements and how to achieve security and compliance in the cloud. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. I'm very excited about this year's Singapore FinTech Festival.
Thanks, Alejandra. And we also have Ned Lowe, who's the CTO of Singlife, as I'm sure you guys have heard in the news recently.
Thanks, Paul. Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. As Paul says, the CTO of Singlife. We're a mobile savings and protection company looking to reshape finance to unlock the potential of money for everyone. We were born in the cloud, digital insurer, so this topic is very sort of dear and to our hearts, and very happy to be here to talk about it today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Ned. And we also have Ishan Girdhar, who's the head of information security at Funding Societies. Ishan, you're muted.
Okay, thank you. And it's really an honor. Thanks, Paul. Really, it's really good honor to be with you all. And I'm Ishan Girdhar, head of security at Funding Society. Funding Societies is a digital financing platform in Southeast Asia, and it's a P2B lending platform. We are also born and cloud-first company, and this is something we have been working on, and we have been working on a good part of our career. So really excited to join this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Ishan. And lastly, we have Steve Teo. He's the Director of Cloud Security and Engineering at Horangi. Steve?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Paul, for inviting me to the panel, and great to see you all guys. Yeah, so my name is Steve, and I'm the Director of Cloud Security Engineering in Horangi Cybersecurity. Paul is my big boss, and I co-run the engineering team, which is building the Warden, our cloud security posture management SaaS platform. So this is really to help our customers who are on AWS and GCP to understand their cloud security risks.
Okay, cool. So I'll start this off with kind of an opening question that lightens the room up a bit. But so for Alejandra, I'll let you start first. So how did you start your career in cybersecurity, and when was the first time you actually got introduced to the cloud?
Okay, well, I have spent half of my career working as a technology audit manager. And the last 3 years prior joining AWS, I was focusing on auditing systems used for financial crime and compliance. And as you all know, compliance and security always go hand by hand, especially in the cloud. So when I joined AWS, I saw that everyone in the company was saying that security is our highest priority. And now I can confirm that for both security off the cloud and in the cloud, what we call this shared responsibility model. And to the part of the question on when I was first introduced to the cloud, as a user, I was always interested in new technologies like cloud computing. But it was really when I started working with customers at AWS when I discovered the real benefits from using the cloud, such as agility, cost saving, elasticity, and as well as innovation. So that was kind of my journey with cybersecurity and the cloud.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And George, how about you? When did you start your career in cyber? And yeah, when's the first time you saw the cloud?
Wow. Thanks for the opportunity to answer that question, Paul. Gosh, I started early. I was in college, my sophomore year. I was fortunate enough to get an internship at NASA. And so when I worked at NASA, I got into cybersecurity. This was late 90s, so it goes way back, right? Also, I would say, my experience at NASA really launched my career because I got to work with really exciting and smart scientists and researchers, including, investigating some really serious cyber breaches with the FBI and the Inspector General, right? To go to the part of the question, the first time I was introduced to the cloud was actually we were doing a migration of Exchange. Back then, believe it or not, email was this thing that was stored on premise on your servers, right? So we were shifting our email infrastructure into the cloud. And, little at the time did we know that was start of something that was, the beginning of all the shift to the cloud. So that was my first experience working on a project of Microsoft Exchange migration into Outlook.
Oh man, I'm sure that was fun, especially back then. It was probably a lot harder than it is now. Steve, how about you? When was the first time? When did you get into cyber, and then kind of when's the first time you got introduced to the cloud?
Yep. So I actually don't come from a formal cybersecurity background. I started out my career as a developer in a bank, and then I transitioned into a DevOps role, which I found a lot more interesting. After that, I moved to Singtel when I was in their enterprise business, their cloud business unit itself, and running the cloud infrastructure of a team that resells SaaS offerings and also offering solutions to our customers based on cloud computing. So that was when I got a lot exposed to providers such as AWS, Azure, and Ali Cloud itself.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. And Ishan, how about you?
Yeah, I think I also started very early. I started back when I was in college, and I started working on these things. And my professors used to say, okay, this guy's crazy. I don't think there would be any jobs around it. And that was one of the biggest motivator to actually go and do more study around cybersecurity. I started my career with working with multiple consulting companies and product companies. And during various experiences through multiple pen test experiences I have been introduced to cloud on and off. But when I was actually working with PayPal, InMobi and PayPal, and that's when I was thoroughly introduced to cloud. Testing, building, detection, prevention, everything around that was something that we were just we were wrapping our heads around and getting some more interesting understanding. Yeah.
Nice. Ned, how about yourself?
Well, I don't have a cyber background per se, but I've worked in a regulated company my entire career. Because of that, it's meant that we've had exposure to cybersecurity and compliance concerns pretty much from day one. So I'd say it's pretty much baked into my DNA of how I approach technology and the technology landscape. As for how I approached cloud, actually, I'm sort of interesting that in probably 2008, I was working for an investment bank in their technology group, and several of the banks got together. And I think there might have been an MAS person there as well, but I might be wrong. I don't want to misspeak there. But and we had a little bit of a collaborative conversation around cloud and what it meant. And honestly, in 2008, it was a very much a nascent technology, and I could see the potential in it, but I wasn't sure exactly where it would go, and it kind of became more of a hobby for myself. And then over the years, as I've watched the adoption and the sort of the trust and the maturity of the model increase, and until, of course, in the first FinTech Festival, we had Ravi Menon on stage with the MAS has no objection to the cloud, has been just such a wonderful journey for me to observe. And then I had the pleasure of working with AWS in various capacities over the last few years. And yeah, it's wonderful seeing that idea from 12 years ago become something now which is almost just part of the new normal.
Yeah, that's awesome. I remember my first experience with the cloud. I've been in cyber my whole career and joined the U.S. government after college, but I started working for Palantir, a tech company in the U.S. And I remember I was working mostly in the government space for them, but some of the devs had in 2011 were starting to use what they called P Cloud, which is essentially AWS and Palantir's integration with it. But yeah, it was quite cool to see. And I remember thinking then, like, there's no way this will ever work in the government just because of the security requirements that are happening there. And then, now the U.S. government is, of course, using a lot of cloud, separated from the normal internet, but using it very heavily, which is very cool to see, and something I, at the time, thought would never happen. Cool. So I'll start off with some questions. So George, given kind of the sheer size of Gojek and its infrastructure, what are the challenges that you face in the cloud, and how have you built your team and your tooling to help solve those challenges?
Yeah, well, look, as a CISO, my lens to my organization is it's a lens of security, right? So, I bucket it into three areas. The first is just the sheer size and complexity of our cloud infrastructure, right? We have a lot of virtual machines, containers, Kubernetes, virtual networks, data stores everywhere, and just keeping up with the size and the complexity of our infrastructure is an effort in itself. Secondly, I would say the speed, right? Security in matching the speed of how the product and engineering organizations move is critical, right? So just ensuring that security lifecycle from source code to API to how the user interacts with our app, super critical. And then finally, third-party integrations, or some of other companies, they call it third-party supply chain. So in areas where we do data sharing with third parties, the notion that once data leaves your environment, you lose control over that data. So what can you do, or what do you need to do to protect that data? And of course, we know from history that a lot of the lessons that we learned from major hacks was due to third parties. So really, those are the three, the top three areas that I look for, that I'm challenged with. Taking a little bit step further, the way I address those strategies or address those challenges is with three strategies. First, I start with what are my top risks, right? Where are my crown jewels? What are the top bad things that can happen in my organization? And then I ask simple questions to myself and as well as my team. Do we have the capabilities to respond to a breach? Can we contain it? How do we eradicate the breach? And can we recover from it? What's the most critical thing for the business? Confidentiality of data or service uptime, or both? If we had to choose, which would be more important, right? So while these questions are simple, they're critically, they're very important to ask before an incident actually hits, and we do that. We do a lot of thought experiments around that. The second strategy that I use is I lean a lot on cloud security tools, right? Couple of things there, couple of comments there. One is we are consistently transforming ourselves to a build versus buy mentality, right? We come from this place where organically we've tried to build everything, and we come to the realizations that, hey, it's not always the best return on investment, or it doesn't move the security needle as much if we don't lean on a buy option, right? And then, just going to the cloud, your paradigm shifts, right? You have to worry less about patching your operating systems and more about, having hardened secured images that you would, provision to your engineering teams, right? Less about network perimeters and firewalls, which is debatable, but now you got to lean on your user and multi-factor authentication, because that becomes critical in your environment. And then thirdly, this is less technology, but to me, critically important for making sure that we do what we need to do to secure in the cloud, which is, they say fire fast and hire slow. That's something that's not, easy to do, easy to say, but it's easy to say. Cybersecurity talent, especially cloud security, is extremely difficult to hire for, and we recognize that. So my mentality is, we hire smart people and get out of their way, right? And I always lean on quality over quantity. So again, if I kind of summarize it, start with the cybersecurity risks. What are the top things? Are we in a place where we can manage, detect, alert, detect, manage, and recover from those incidents? Lean heavy on cloud security tools because your paradigm has shifted and changed. And then finally, build a very strong team, a strong bench that can help you manage your ongoing daily security of the cloud.
Thanks, George. So those are some really good insights, and I think it speaks a lot. I've met your security team a couple of times, and all great ladies and gentlemen that are doing great work, as you mentioned. Alejandra, you kind of help a lot of companies in their transition to the cloud, as well as their development in it. What do you advise companies to focus on in terms of security and compliance?
Well, as you said, I work with a lot of companies. So at AWS, we have millions of active customers every month, but not all of them are in the same stage or have the same objectives. So we support our customers through the journey, and we have identified a few steps that are key for a successful migration. So for example, skill up employees, and this is in line with what George was sharing right now. And you don't want to do exactly what you're doing on premises in the cloud. So cloud computing has many benefits, as I shared before, and you should design your architecture to benefit from those advantages. Another key point for highly regulated industries like financial services is to understand the shared responsibility model, your roles and responsibilities, including the applicable regulatory requirements, like in Singapore from MAS, and have an enterprise agreement that covers the terms and the conditions that govern your access to the use of the services from the cloud service provider. So with that information and the support from our solutions architect in the case of AWS or AWS professional services, we also have partners. Our customers are building a secure and high-performing, also resilient and efficient infrastructure, and passing their internal and external audits, as well as obtaining approval from the regulators whenever is required.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I remember when I first started Horangi back in 2016. We were working with a lot of companies that were using the cloud, and yeah, explaining the shared responsibility model then was like a common thing that I would have to do the customers in terms of security. But these days, most everyone understand it, which is good to see. A lot of progression, I think, in that space. I'm sure that's from you and your team. So Ned, first, kind of congratulations on the recent merger. Very exciting, I'm sure. Yeah, and I think it's exciting not only for you, but and Singlife, but also for the whole ecosystem. I think it's one of the biggest mergers that happened in the tech space, at least that I can remember. I guess one thing that comes to mind is, like, given that Singlife is obviously like a modern kind of tech company, kind of born in the cloud. Aviva is, of course, been around for a lot longer, and probably uses the cloud a bit, but definitely not born in the cloud. Yeah, how are you guys kind of thinking about solving that problem going forward, and what is the future of the cloud in that combined behemoth?
Well, thank you. It's a difficult question because we have to acknowledge and we have to be empathetic that there are two very different sort of baselines here. And if it was easy, right, if you could just take any company that had been around with the mature processes and was running primarily on-prem and click your fingers and move everything into a beautiful target state, then we'd have already all done it. And so, everyone is very much aware that this is going to be, a lot of work. But what's great is that we're all aligned in terms of what the outcome should be, right? It's very hard these days to find someone who doesn't agree that having a really secure cloud-first environment is the right way to go. And once you've got the right North Star and once you've got the right target in mind, then it just becomes a question of how do you get there and what are the best steps to get there. And I'd say if you'd asked me the same question about how I might go about that 5 or 6 years ago, it'd be a much more complicated answer than it is today, because of the maturity of the cloud ecosystem. And so much of this stuff, in my opinion, is becoming maybe not a solved problem, but certainly there are best practices that one can look towards. And so, for example, the concept of landing zones, which are sort of a best practices package of setting up your environment, that is now something which is common parlance amongst many cloud engineers. And George was mentioning before about the cloud security tools and having stuff that you can kind of take off the shelf, such as Horangi Warden. Once you've got a consistent setup in your environment, then these tools can start being plugged in, and that gives you a sort of a baseline level of sort of maturity and comfort that is very difficult to do maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So I think those foundational blocks are becoming more and more easy to look at. Now, of course, that doesn't alleviate the pain or the complexity of actually doing migrations. And for that, I very heavily rely on, again, some of the methodologies that have been worked out over the last few years, that assuming that everything should rush to the cloud on day one is actually not necessarily the right answer. And looking to see where you get the best bang for your buck is a much more sort of sensible approach. And maybe that means moving something across and then iterating upon it. Maybe it means leaving it where it is. Maybe it means decommissioning something. There's a whole raft of answers. So long story short, the target state is clear. We want to be, a fully cloud-enabled 21st century best practice insurer. The path that we take to get there is something that we're going to have to work out the details a little bit, but we're all super excited to do it.
Yeah, I can't imagine that being an easy project, so to say, but it's good you guys have the shared vision. I think ultimately that's what's most important.
That's the most important bit, yeah. And just to pick up on that, 5-8 years ago, that was not a given, right? There was the target state was still a question mark. People would say, no, fundamentally, I do not believe that this is the correct approach. But I think there's been enough case studies and enough momentum and enough people who've got their own successes to say, well, look what we did and look at how successful it was in allowing us to innovate and move quickly. But everyone's like, oh, okay, fair enough. That's a good end state. Now we just got to work out the path.
Yeah, for sure. And you don't see any startups or companies starting up today that aren't utilizing the cloud in a serious way, right? And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I remember when I first joined Palantir, we had all these servers in the office that were constantly running, Linux, and of course Oracle back at the time was before even they were using Postgres. But it was such a pain to get it to work, and then you had to have all of your network and VPN set up so you could correctly get into the servers, and then that's a huge security nightmare as well, right? So definitely a lot of that's kind of solved these days, which is much easier for a small company to start than investing millions of dollars of hardware to get off the ground, right?
Well, exactly. Having that sort of ability to stand on the shoulders of giants is really what's allowed people like Singlife to move so quickly. So it's a wonderful time to be in the tech space now. Yeah,
definitely agree. Thanks for that, Ned. And Ishan, kind of, you guys are obviously a cloud first and regulated fintech. What cloud security and compliance initiatives are you looking at in 2021?
Okay. So initiative-wise, I think our major focus are on two sides of the puzzle, which is one on the cloud, definitely, making sure data governance, now that with AWS organizations and so much automation around data organizations and policies, there's just so much to have new accounts to be spun up. So we are making sure that data governance and data that we have is in place. So data governance, by governance, I mean mostly educating and creating awareness around data ownership and data liability, as well as data assets, how data assets can easily become data liabilities. So awareness around that, as well as more and more awareness along with the controls, I would say, and having those folks actually carry out those controls is one area we are looking at. And the other side of the puzzle is where now that everyone is working remotely, we don't have a traditional office network, or we don't have a sort of a zone where we can keep our traffic secure. So making sure that piece of the puzzle where users are connecting to networks and clouds are also secured, making sure that the connection to the cloud is also secure and data on the cloud is also secure. So there's a lot of things that we are working towards. The one thing that we are working towards is using VPN as much as possible on AWS, and like Amazon does provide amazing capabilities around that. But how we can actually integrate and automate the posture checking of the clients as well as connecting to the data, so that we know everyone who can connect to the cloud can only connect if they have certain threshold and certain baseline match. And that also has helped us a lot in achieving a certain baseline to begin with. So we know the data, the machines that are connecting to the cloud are also somewhat sanitized and to a certain baseline that we all approve of. That has been a biggest, I think, initiative that we are working towards. Second, I would say on the compliance side, I would say it's a risk management that we are trying to automate. So everyone has been working towards building and delivering and service delivery, while risk management is trying to go and work with them. What we are trying to do is bridge that gap by automating as much as possible. So instead of actually using different tools, what we are doing is we have started a new initiative which basically use existing developer tools to build out that whole risk management and asset management workflows with those tools itself. So that has been another thing that we are really excited about. And I believe that would be going to be very amazing, because that is going to save a lot of time for the developers and the engineering teams as well going forward.
Yeah, and then obviously that's really important. I think George touched on this as well, is like the speed of development in the cloud is significant over what it is in the more traditional environments. And as a security team, you kind of have to adjust to that and kind of sometimes move out of the way, but also like implement security and automate it as much as possible while the development is going on, which is difficult, right? There's always trade-offs, right? Either way, whether it's security, you're implementing more security, or enabling them to develop faster, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how much time you can save by just automating some of these things from a risk management point of view, compliance audit point of view. You also make the audit more consistent and across the board and every year. And you also make life of your engineers, almost hiring new engineers. It's almost like so much bandwidth available to you that they really appreciate towards the end.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I mean, reducing the risk, I think, helps the engineers and, of course, the security team sleep much better at night all the time, right? Cool. Steve, so obviously at Horangi, we work with a lot of companies in different industries and of course at different scales. Like, what are issues and changes you're kind of seeing that are in the security space, and how are those shaping Horangi and the roadmap?
So for one thing, there's a strong rising cloud adoption throughout most sectors in the industry itself. And if you look at the data center growth, in Southeast Asia or around the world, right, you see that's actually very strong. AWS, Azure, GCP adoption, even in the key markets. I think especially with the announcement about a year back with the Indonesian region itself, right? We're actually starting to see a lot more customers talking about moving to AWS and GCP. So that's already a hint to basically the trends that are coming up within the market itself. And on the other side, for larger organizations, especially those Fortune 500, when they have a lot of usage of multiple clouds, either through acquisition or just de-risking exposure, you see that that's definitely one of our drivers for us to push towards to providing more cloud providers as part of our platform itself, which will include Warden in the near future. And on the second thing, I think like George mentioned itself, right? It's really hard to hire cloud security professionals. And this problem is going to be more severe as more and more companies, have a lot more demand and there are outstrip supplies in that sense. So we definitely want to make sure to keep the platform simple and easy to use. Build remediation features within the platform where it makes sense itself, and to address the needs for customers who just cannot have access to talent, right? I think on the Horangi itself, we like services is our DNA and product. We're starting to get strong in it, and I think what we really want to do is to make sure that when the customers, come to us, right, they know that we can provide services to match in any advisory questions that they might have itself. On one more interesting note is that if you look at the cloud security space. it's actually fundamentally changing on a few levels itself. Where someone like Gartner would have said in the past, right, was that, hey, most of the times it's because someone left an S3 bucket exposed to the whole world itself, right? You see that now the parameter is actually changing more from the network or resource layer itself into actually going more towards the identity and access management layer, and it's projected that I think up to 80% of most future incidents, right, is really due to poor identity and access management practices. So on that note, right, like with the Capital One attack, especially, I think there's a very strong point around attacks increasingly becoming more sophisticated and actually moving down the lateral path around there itself. I think there's a very strong need to have more capable IAM analysis features, that can help with attack path analysis and making sure that that even if you miss out one permission, and that one permission can actually cost you your business, right? I think that's where we really want to go, and to make sure that you actually secure, because that complexity is very hidden, and it will bite you very hard if you choose to let it to itself. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think those are good points, and very much excited to see all those in the product next year. Yeah, so the next one, we're running into some of the last questions here, but I wanted to ask you guys, like, what's the security phrase that you find yourself saying the most at your organization? And I'm going to tell you guys mine just to ease it up. But my favorite one that we use all the time is because it's more common more recently because I've been playing a video game where they say it, but it's teamwork makes the dream work, which is what we talk about a lot when we're talking about security, as well as pretty much anything we do at our company. But George, like, what's the security phrase that you're using the most these days?
Oh gosh, the audience or my esteemed colleagues may laugh, but I have this one that I use all the time. Not all the time, thankfully, but I think the team will smile a little bit when you hear it. I call it, I say to my team, don't ever let an incident go to waste, right? And that means, we're going to have breaches, meaning most will be, low level, others will be, more critical, but each and every one of those, is a lesson in a bottle, right? So we need to really learn from all those incidents. So I tend to lean really heavy on my team. If we do have a major breach, we don't let that pass, right? We just can't, cut corners around that. So again, my phrase is don't ever let an incident go to waste. People, quickly jump to, hey, that's an argument for more budget, more headcount. Of course, right? Security teams are always starved, so we always go after that. But at the same time, it's more around, hey, what are the structural things that are broken? What are our processes that were broken? I talked earlier about, in the universe of security risks out there, in the cloud and beyond, you're going to have some residual risk. If that residual risk happens to have trigger an incident, you still need a safety net in terms of how your organization will be able to respond to that, right? So again, don't ever let an incident go to waste.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, and you mentioned earlier a lot of the tabletop exercises, which is really important in helping you with those situations as well. Yeah, so that's cool. Ned, how about you? I mean, I guess yours doesn't have to be security related, but what's the team phrase that you're using?
Well, it is actually relevant to security, although not just security, which is guardrails, not speed bumps. And I think if you want to go fast, you have to put in the guardrails. And as long as you stay within those rails, you can go very quickly. If you put in speed bumps, then by definition, you're going to go more slowly. And I think that one of the beautiful things that I see with this sort of standardization, shall we say, of having the cloud environments is that it allows us to have common guardrails where we can start sharing best practices amongst one another. And what I really, really want to see, and it's touched a little bit on what a few of you were saying before, Ishan and Steve in particular, I think, is that if in the world of security and compliance you have policies which are not necessarily enforced in what the developers are actually doing, then you have to start having audits and such like and checking evidence to make sure that they're in line. But if your policies are part of the environment, if you can't create, for example, an unencrypted hard disk, it's just impossible. If you try and create it, it just shuts itself down. Then you move from being, here's a policy and here's why I comply to it, to being, well, here's my set of automated rules, and that's why it fulfills the TRM or the the RMIT or whatever the relevant regulatory body is, and so you can construct guardrails that let you go fast and use those guardrails to prove that you're operating in a safe and compliant fashion.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that one. I might use that internally.
You got to credit me, though.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. I'll write it down there in the bottom. Ishan, how about you?
Yeah, so I think one thing I have been finding myself saying a lot more and more recently is the phrase bringing, like basically reducing risk to an acceptable level with an acceptable cost. Because when we see a problem or a challenge in cloud or otherwise, right, we would want to jump and solve that problem, and solving problems innately or permanently, or at least permanently enough so that it doesn't become a problem again. I believe that is, to say it, okay, apologies. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I missed the question, sorry. Could you just repeat the question?
Yeah, I was just asking, like, the security phrase that kind of you use the most in your organization. So I think you kind of already answered it, but yeah, if you want to elaborate more, please do.
Oh yeah. So yeah, just going back to that phrase. So bringing the cost down to an acceptable level within the acceptable, reducing the risk to an acceptable level within an acceptable cost is very important, because we want to solve everything, and prioritizing what we want to solve within that risk and what we don't want to solve, because not solving would actually bring more business clarity and the things that you would want to do it. And after that, a certain point, it would be just waste of money. So you would only want to solve what is absolutely important and prioritized, and then basically going back and looking at how we can automate this and solve this, right? So I believe within the acceptable, bringing the risk to an acceptable level. So knowing what is your acceptable level, as George mentioned, what is your residual risk, what is your acceptable risk, knowing that is important so that you can take that call, and then knowing what is that you would want to go and solve first, which will have a minimum effort and a maximum impact.
Yeah, definitely true. I mean, as George mentioned as well, like, security teams are always sort of constrained around costs and what we can do with that certain cost. So making sure that, you're investing in things that significantly reduce the risk, and not spending money on the small percentage of risk items is very important.
Yeah, I mean, and more importantly, it's not the exactly cost in terms of dollar amount. It's more in the terms of bandwidth of the developers and everyone who's involved into that. Right, and when you save that amount, that gives you a lot more benefit than actually giving a dollar amount, right? And this happens to be solved because everyone wants to solve everything. There's just so many problems to be solving, and there's so many incidents happening at a daily level. You would want to understand and fix everything, but you cannot. So you would want to really see what is the thing that I can do, which will bring it under the acceptable risk. You would see most of the time when you have incidents, you would want to make sure that everything is done and dusted so that it doesn't happen again. But there are certain things that just goes right out of the residual risk, and you don't have really good arguments to actually go on and why you should be saving it or solving it, right? That part is really important. Asking why and knowing that threshold is very important.
Yeah, totally agree. And Alejandra, how about you?
Yeah, so very quickly, it's actually funny that it's similar to what Ned or Steve were sharing. So I keep repeating myself about best practices on identity and access management, which is the first step on AWS security. So repeating those best practices, like you want to follow the principle of the least privilege. You want to protect your root user, which is the super user that have access to everything in your account. You want to use multi-factor authentication. And then in addition to having those controls, you want to do monitoring. And as we were also sharing, you want to automate as much as possible and keep the humans away from the data. So those are the kind of things that I repeat over and over.
Awesome. Yeah, all those are important tidbits that I think are super relevant to security in the cloud. And I think there's a Gartner quote that I love to quote, which is basically like 99% of the cloud security failures are going to be the customer's fault, right? Because a lot of times people are making like the simple mistakes that actually hurt them. All right, we got like 45 seconds left. So Steve, what is the one sort of phrase that you use internally in the engineering team to, whether it's security or not, that you feel like mentioning?
I think you took away my quote already, but I have another quote which I normally don't mention to customers, and the quote is, it's based off a Star Wars meme. I find your lack of security disturbing.
That one's good. That one's good. Yes, definitely don't say that to our customers, but definitely in some cases it probably is warranted. So yeah. Well, thanks everyone for joining the panel. I think it's time's ending now, but yeah, really appreciate all of the panelists and of course the audience as well. So enjoy the rest of Singapore FinTech Festival.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.